Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 106. It's over. Isn't it? Naomasa was starting to curse this promotion when he pulled up to the USJ, tires damn near still screeching as he flung himself out of the car. He saw Toshinori's boy getting wheeled away on a stretcher, and for a moment, all he could think was, I didn't even get the chance to meet him. He was doing his best to shake the morose thought from his mind when he saw a second stretcher race to another ambulance with Eraser on it, covered in blood and completely motionless. He bit back any sort of reaction he had to those sights and let a veil of professionalism fall over his features. Help was already here. Whether or not they were going to be okay didn't hinge on his level of concern, so he pushed it down as best he could. He had a job to do. Unfortunately, a large part of that job was to get statements from freshly traumatized kids, as all the adults present appeared to have been loaded up into ambulances. Terrific. He let his officers take charge of ushering various criminals into cruisers and ambulances and headed for the first adult he saw, who just happened to be Yamada. If anyone asked, that was purely coincidence and didn't have anything to do with his poorly ignored concern for Aizawa. Mike, report, he called out while jogging to keep stride with him as he marched somewhere like a man on a warpath. Group of villains infiltrated the facility, upwards of 100 random street thugs and 3 main leaders, from what I understand. But I didn't get here much sooner than you, so that's all I know for sure. 2 of them got away, he explained, curtly juxtaposing the gentle care he used to drape shock blankets over 2 students who were soaking wet and shivering despite the warm spring air. He waited until Yamada started walking away out of earshot from the kids before he asked his next question. Casualties? 1 student, 2 teachers, severe to critical condition for all 3. He tried to report coolly, but his tone hitched. Is Aizawa... He trailed off, not wanting to say the words, knowing Yamada would know what he was asking regardless. I'm not certain, but from what I saw, he's got a severe concussion and 2 broken arms. He didn't look it, but he was probably in the best shape out of the 3. Head wounds bleed a lot. He stated clinically, I need to get back to helping the students. They dismissed and walked away. Shit, okay. That was going to have to be enough to satiate his worry right now. He was working. It wasn't his job to demand the wounded's current status of well-being. The report would come to him in time. With a deep breath, he made his way into the facility. Naomasa knew this was a center for rescue training, but he wasn't familiar enough to know what level of carnage was supposed to be present. He was fairly certain that the swaths of blood spread across the central plaza were not supposed to be there, though. Pushing on, he made his way over to the principal, who was currently talking to Vlad King, directing him to call back to Center Campus and dismiss classes. As Naomasa approached, Vlad took his leave. Ah, afternoon, detective, the creature greeted, his cheerful tone betrayed by the scowl that graced his features. Afternoon, Nedzu. Do you have a list of those present at the incident? I've been instructed to get statements from everyone, he said regretfully. Yes, as I'd expected, all the students were witnesses, and from what little I have gathered, I believe that they were spread throughout the facility in pairs or small groups. Most of them are still in those groups outside, which will be convenient for getting their statements, I suppose. Both of the instructors present have been taken to urgent care, along with only 1 student. This could have been much, much worse, he claimed, though the statement didn't seem to bring either of them comfort. It is my understanding that you are also aware of Yagi-san's condition, so do feel free to get a statement from him. He was the first to respond and is likely to have the most information. He's on the other side of this, petition. He gave Nedzu a polite nod and made his way down the steps toward the wall. He felt his heart sink as he spotted Recovery Girl tending to Toshinori next to an impressively large pool of blood. Kami. There was too much blood. But Toshinori was sitting up and talking, so it was unlikely to be his. Oh, oh. It probably belonged to the creature lying motionless a few yards behind him. Its brain was exposed and butchered. The sight would have a man with a weaker constitution retching into the nearest trash can, but whether fortunately or unfortunately, Naomasa was accustomed to gruesome sights. Even so, his stomach recoiled slightly. Upon the closer inspection, the blood covering the ground and most of Toshinori's shirt looked to be a few shades too dark to be human. He's not sure whether that realization made it better or worse. Toshinori appeared to be fighting exhaustion with panic and exasperation. He was trying to get up and dismiss himself from the scolding he was currently receiving, but Recovery Girl wasn't having it. He looked incredibly grateful to see Naomasa approaching. Naomasa, do you know their conditions? He asked before he could get a word in. I've been told they're critical, but alive, he reported. It didn't seem to do much to calm him, but he at least stopped fighting to stand up as he ran a hand over his face. He was hesitant to push him, but his choices were either Toshinori or going in to blindly question 19 traumatized children. And he knew that's not what his friend would want either, so he continued. I need to get a statement, Toshinori, he prompted. He scrubbed a hand over his face and took a deep breath before responding, Yes, of course. He turned to the Recovery Girl to dismiss her before he started. You remember what I said, boy, she warned before taking her leave. When she was out of earshot, he began, I had reached my limit before classes had started. It was moronic, I know. I was supposed to be here from the beginning. They were after me. Toshinori stopped himself. They both knew that was more conjecture than the statement required. Young Ida came back to Central Campus to notify us of the situation, and I responded immediately. All communications had been cut, and all exits had been sealed. He was the only one that had managed to get out. When I got here, several students were tending to 13 at the main entrance, and Aizawa he was in the center, here, with a villain pinning him down. He must have been seconds away from dying, so I stepped in. I got him out of there, and when I looked back, one of the students, young Midoriya, was standing on a broken leg, and that creature, he gestured over his shoulder, was after him. I got him out of there with less than a second to spare, and Toshinori trailed off. Naomasa gave him a minute. Toshinori had always kept a tight leash on his emotions. He had never seen the man so affected. He told me the creature had multiple quirks. He finished, looking up to meet Naomasa's gaze. His blood froze at that. No, it couldn't be. There had to be another explanation. Do you think? I don't know. I I don't know. He told me it wasn't human, that it was made to kill me. He said that I had to kill it before it killed me and everyone else in the building. That was that was horrifying to hear. He couldn't imagine those words coming out of the mouth of that sweet-looking boy he'd seen so many pictures of. He faced it on his own. He was trying to save his teacher, Toshinori added, staring off into nothing. He was right, too. He told me it had shock absorption, enhanced strength and speed, and regenerative capabilities. I had to take the kid's knife from its head and butcher its brain before it went down. If I hadn't done that, I'm sure I'd be getting wheeled out of here on a stretcher too, and that's probably the best case scenario, he concluded. So whoever did this either has the capabilities to bioengineer quirks, or he trailed off, not wanting to speak that reality into existence. Yes, it appears so, Toshinori confirmed. How did they get away? The two that escaped? I was well over my limit. If I took so much as a step, I was going to lose my grasp. One of them had a warping quirk. I assume that's how they got in as well. He could make portals that himself and others could step through. Naomasa didn't want to think about how close of a call this whole thing had been. All right, do you have anything else to report? No, that's all I know. Toshinori finished sounding more dejected than he'd ever heard him sound. Naomasa offered out a hand as his friend struggled to get to his feet. He was glad that most of the worst fights went down in the central plaza. The students were clearly shaken, but not too far gone to give coherent reports. Most of them didn't have a clue what had happened in the plaza, though a few had witnessed the tail end of the fight. Katsuki Bakugo, Eijiro Kirishima, and Shoto Todoroki had all reported that they were heading in to aid in the fight when the creature went down. All three had no issues reporting what had happened up until that point, but when they got to the final moments of All Might's clash with the beast, they had much less detail to offer. Todoroki gave the most comprehensive recollection, but it was stilted and void of any emotion, much like the rest of his report. He could hardly blame them after hearing what they had seen from 4 different people now. He had 4 more students left to question, and he was not looking forward to the next 2. From what he'd heard, apparently, they had borne witness to almost everything that happened in the plaza from beginning to end. It was the 2 students Yamada had draped shock blankets over when he'd first arrived, Hitoshi Shinso and Tsuyu Asui. He approached them with caution and did his best to appear non-threatening, but by the looks of it, they didn't have the presence left to be afraid of much of anything right now. Sheesh, this really couldn't wait? No, it was best to just rip the band-aid off. Hello, I'm Detective Tsukashi. I'm here to get your statements, he greeted, getting straight to the point. The kids looked up at him slowly, then to one another before turning back to him. They didn't move to speak, and he was about to prompt them again when Yamada came running over with a water bottle in each hand. Hey, detective. What's going on? He asked in a slightly toned-down version of his boisterous persona. He handed a bottle of water to each of the kids, and Naomasa was incredibly grateful that he butted in. Trying to extract answers from a traumatized brick wall was never pleasant, and he was hoping Yamada had built enough of a rapport with these 2 to get them talking as painlessly as possible. Ah, Mike, good to see you. I'm getting statements from the students. Can't this wait? They asked under their breath. I have my orders, and I think it's best to just get it over with if we can. I don't want to have to bring them into the station later, he responded just as quietly. He watched resignation fall over their expression as they sat down in front of the kids. All right, kiddos, you need to tell this cool cat what you saw. I can help where I can, but I don't know what happened before I got there. I've worked with him before. He's very nice. If you need a second, just let us know and we'll give you all the time we can. But it's better to get this over with, right? Drawing it out is just gonna make it worse, you dig? He explained kindly. The kids looked at him, then to each other and back to him slowly, just like they had when Naomasa had spoken to them. But unlike with him, they responded with small nods. Okay, thank you. I'll be right here the whole time, they said, shooting a glare toward him, daring him to argue. He shot back a grateful nod to communicate that he was not about to force them away from these kids for a second. Yamada looked back at him and then shot a pointed look at the ground next to where he was sitting. He got the memo and took a seat with his legs crossed in front of him. It felt a bit ridiculous, but if Yamada thought that it would make the kids more comfortable, then he would do it gladly. All right. Can I get a group report from you 2? You were together the whole time, correct? They both nodded. Okay. Either of you can start. Shinso gave a report that matched what everyone else had said about the villain's entrance, and Asui took over after they had been warped away. They warped the 3 of us to the shipwreck zone, Gero. She started. 3, Naomasa interjected. That seemed to have been the wrong thing to say because they both clammed up. Midoriya was with you, right? Yamada prompted. Ah, that made sense. They nodded and he gave them a second to continue. We were all dropped in the water and there were villains there. I grabbed Shinso and Midoriya out of the lake and brought us onto the boat. Asui continued. Even though Naomasa had just spent the last couple of hours hearing about how these children defended themselves and their peers from real-life villains, he was still impressed each time they recounted their actions. These kids were something else. They clearly belonged here. Midoriya took charge of the situation once we were on the boat. He had me draw as many villains toward us as I could and gave Sue and me a boost to jump as far away from the center as we could. Then he broke the boat in half. He said the vacuum would pull them in or something. Whatever he did kept them far enough away from us to escape, and he followed after us. Shinso continued. Naomasa had gotten reports from his officers about that area. Apparently, it had been a close call on one of the criminals in the water. He'd been out for a while and had to be given CPR after nearly drowning, but he kept that information to himself. These kids didn't need to know that they were technically complicit in a near murder, even if it was in self-defense. Midoriya told us to go to the entrance and wait for help. Asui trailed off. He said he needed to help Aizawa-sensei. He took off before we could stop him, Shinso added before trailing off as well. He knew enough to know where the story was going, so he gave them a minute. Yamada took one of their hands in each of his and did his best to reassure them. We followed him because we didn't want... He should have... Shinso tried before trailing off again. Asui looked at him with a furrowed brow before taking the reins back. We were all in the water next to the plaza, and we saw the thing break Aizawa-sensei's arms, and Midoriya jumped up. He threw a knife into its brain and then punched it in the stomach, but it didn't do anything. There was a shockwave. I felt it, but it didn't move an inch. He talked to the leader for a little bit, but I don't remember much of what he said. He was taunting them, though, joking around like he wasn't about to... Like they wouldn't... The mist guy showed up in the middle of it, and Midoriya tried to take down the thing because it still had Aizawa-sensei pinned. Shinso added, it swatted him away, and the leader told it to kill him. It went after him so fast I couldn't tell what was happening. Midoriya dodged it for a while, but it grabbed him by the leg and crushed it before throwing him onto the stairs. All Might got them both out of there before anything else happened, Kero. We went around the plaza and found Aizawa-sensei and Midoriya. They were both... Midoriya started giving us first aid instructions for Aizawa-sensei, and we just did what he told us to until the thing screamed and got our attention. All Might, he beat it, but Midoriya just kind of lost it. He started screaming and trying to get up. He was trying to get back to All Might, and that's when Yamada-sensei showed up. Shinso finished their tale. Good Lord. Naomasa was impressed and horrified in equal measure. He couldn't imagine how that kid was capable of giving first aid instruction in the state he was in. He'd assumed he'd been knocked out for a while, but apparently he was with it until the very end. All of these kids were remarkable, and he wished they hadn't gotten the opportunity to prove that so soon. He turned his focus to Yamada to get the rest of the statement. He could see the subtle tension in their shoulders tighten with each word the kids had said, but they didn't let a bit of it show on their face. As the attention was turned back to him, he slowly forced the stiffness back as unobtrusively as it had crept up. As they said, when I got there, Midoriya was panicking. He was worried that All Might was alone with that creature. He said it could regenerate, and he was worried that it wasn't dead. I did my best to calm him down, but then Eraser passed out, and he lost it again. He was moving around too much. Eraser said his ribs were broken and his lung had been punctured, so I had Shinso use his quirk to keep him still. He's got a mind control quirk. The paramedics showed up shortly after that, and you pretty much know the rest, Yamada concluded. With a stiff nod and a smile he was sure didn't fool Yamada for a second, he stood up slowly. All right. Thank you for your statements. Please take these. He pulled out 2 business cards and handed one to each of them. And let me know if you think of anything that you forgot to tell me. Any footage that would have been caught was cut off with the rest of the security and communications. So your statements are invaluable. He spared another grateful nod for Yamada and left them to process all of that in peace. There was one more student he needed to talk to, the boy who had gone back to Center Campus to alert the staff. He also needed to get statements from the 2 teachers and student that had been injured, but, well, that was going to have to wait. End of chapter.